You know about Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors, but who are some under the radar and late round rookies you should be drafting in 2024? We'll tell you right now on FFT Express. And good morning, or whenever you're good morning, good afternoon, good night. There we go. Covered all the bases there. I'm Adam Aizer with Jamie Eisenberg. We're talking about under the radar rookies. Who would you like to start with, sir?
We could start with the running backs. So let's just say you get past the group of, the obvious ones: Jonathan Brooks still, Trey Benson still, Blake Corum. I think those are probably the three most obvious, maybe Marshawn Lloyd being the fourth. Then you get into the group of guys. I guess you want to throw Jalen Wright in there because he's going to be popular. The guys that I tend to take with late round picks would be the trio, maybe the quartet, maybe what's five? What's a group of five? Quintet. Would be, I look for Tyrone Tracy because he could be a factor for the Giants. I look for Ray Davis, who could be the handcuff and maybe a factor for the Bills. Audric Estime is somebody that could be a factor for the Broncos. Kamani Vidal is someone I draft a lot of him just because you have an older Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins coming off of the Achilles. And then Braylon Allen. Those are more lottery ticket type guys. And it's hard to expect them to be significant factors without an injury. Again, you could see Ray Davis maybe being the goal line option for the Bills. They had 5 rushing touchdowns from Latavius Murray and Damien Harris last year, so you can fill that role. But these are all good, late round flyers. Again, so for me, the obvious ones would be, the three that Marshawn Lloyd and Jalen Wright. So you get past that group of running backs. These are the guys that I think are good late round options. And Dylan Lobby now should be in that conversation too, just because he could have a role for the Raiders, knowing that, not a significant pass catcher for Las Vegas there with Samir White. Did
you mention Bucky Irving for the Bucs?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Bucky Irving as well. There's so many guys. It's a very interesting class that there's, I hesitate to say there's even a headliner just because of Brooks with injury, but Brooks is the headliner. Benson and Corum, just based on the offense that they landed in, and questionable starters. Connor being injury prone and Kyron being a 1-year guy, really, from everybody else past that could be contributor to some capacity.
Yeah, and Bucky Irving, I think, is the only guy in this class whose first name is also the name of the team that drafted him, basically.
Sure.
And I don't think we talk enough about that. Okay, so those are some under the radar rookie running backs. Any quarterbacks? Bo Nix or
under the radar, it's more 2QB and Superflex leagues. We were talking about Nix and McCarthy in May, as having the chance to be contributors. McCarthy is the one that interests me the most just because of the offense that he plays in and the receivers that he has. For Nix and for May, it's going to take a lot of heavy lifting for them to have to get to be fantasy relevant. Now, the benefit for Nix versus the other two is he's probably going to be the starter in week 1. The other two guys, May and McCarthy, may not start to open the season. So, again, if you're taking them in Superflex and 2QB leagues, what do you expect? You're expecting, part-time play. And at what point do they get those starters roles?
Yeah. So if you're in a 2QB league, how do you make that decision between JJ McCarthy and Bo Nix?
I think it depends on what you have. Some people, I know you go this route. You take 4 quarterbacks, even in a 15 or 16 round draft, and you like to. I'm sorry.
Not always.
No, not always. But that's an approach that you've done before.
And it works.
If I'm taking the 4th quarterback, I'm probably taking the more upside play. If I'm taking the 3rd quarterback, which I expect to maybe have to use, then I'm probably leaning more toward Bo Nix, just because again he may help me in an injury situation early, but I expect him to be there late in terms of bye weeks. Whereas you never know. If Sam Darnold's playing well and the Vikings are in playoff contention, are they playing JJ McCarthy? Probably not.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's take a break here. We'll talk about some under-the-radar wide receivers when we come back on Fantasy Football Today Express. Yeah, so we are really digging this wide receiver class, but who are some of the the non-headliners, the ones that don't get talked about enough that people need to be at least thinking about on draft day?
So we removed Neighbors, Harrison Neighbors. Man, imagine Neighbors going ahead of Harrison.
No, I don't think that far.
You remove Harrison, you remove Neighbors, you remove Odunze, you remove
Xavier Worthy and
Worthy, Thomas, Coleman, and McConkey, right? Those are the guys that are going to universally get drafted.
Yeah. Yep.
So, and I think we removed Pearsall because he's more in this category of guys that we're talking about, but we know there's an IU trade, his value skyrockets. We talked about one on our full-length episode. Jalen Polk. Good opportunity for him to be a contributor for the Patriots. And even in the same conversation, you should keep an eye on Javon Baker because he's having a good camp as well. It's a wide open receiving core. Demario Douglas is the established guy with Kendrick Bourne. Douglas is a year 2 guy. Bourne's coming off an ACL. So, wouldn't be surprising if Polk and Baker are their 2 best receivers. I take a lot of Jalen McMillan, and it's a very interesting prospect for me because he should be the 3rd receiver. We know the top 2 guys are going to dominate targets, and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. But Godwin kicking inside, McMillan's having a great camp by all counts. And should something happen to one of the other 2 guys, you could see a bigger role for a player who's really talented. I think not the short end of the stick, but a little underrated coming out of Washington. Could be a big time playmaker there.
I go right after him is Luke McCaffrey. I don't draft Luke McCaffrey.
Yeah, it's a good call.
But you don't have to. But I think that's sort of wide open after McLaurin. I'm not sold on Jahan Dotson.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's gotten some good reports. I think you can get, if he starts playing regularly, you could get maybe 10 rushing yards a game out of McCaffrey. It's possible.
Yep.
That's a huge deal, but we're talking about under the radar guys here. So McCaffrey was the 100th pick in the draft. He was 1 wide receiver after Jalen McMillan. Right before him is Roman Wilson. Haven't really.
There's like another trio of guys. Your best joke that you've ever told at Night Vigil. Can he get the volume that he needs to be fantasy relevant right away? That's the question. But clearly could be the 2nd receiver there for the Colts, even ahead of Josh Downs. So a lot of people, like myself included, but wouldn't be surprising if Mitchell's that 2nd guy behind Michael Pittman. Troy Franklin, we look at this Broncos receiving core, and it's Cortland Sutton's the established guy. They bring in Josh Reynolds. We'll see what Tim Patrick makes team. Marvin Mims, just a lot of guys there, and very similar in Pittsburgh. A lot of guys there. Roman Wilson could be the 2nd best receiver, so it wouldn't be surprising, if you're taking shots on those 2 guys and seeing what develops there. So there's a lot of under the radar guys, but and I'll throw one more in there. For me, it's kind of McMillan, and this guy is Jermaine Burton. You're looking for offenses that you can sort of buy into. Obviously, buy into the Bengals offense, and depending on what they do, whether it's I always butcher his name, Iosivas. If he's going to play in the slot, or if Burton's going to play more on the outside, and that moves Jamar Chase in the slot. I think they're going to move these guys around a lot in terms of how they use them. But if Burton hits and is an outside receiver more often than not, catching pass from Joe Burrow is pretty good.
Well, I'll tell you, Jacob Gibbs is hopeful that Jamar Chase plays more in the slot. He loves his numbers there. He thinks that could, obviously, Jamar Chase have a big season if he doesn't play in the slot a lot, but that could make it even bigger. All right, and we'll just close up with any tight ends. Are there any under the radar tight ends, rookies?
There's 3. My favorite one is Ben Sinnott. You're looking at Zach Ertz as most likely the starter, but this is, again, you talked about not being sold on Jahan Dotson. Well, it's a wide open receiving core unless they make a trade for Brandon Ayuk. Sinnott, 2nd round pick, profiles like a Laporta type of guy, who could be a contributor right away. So you have to be patient, but we could see him, have an impact. Jatavian Sanders, with the Panthers, opportunity there, just incomplete tight end group. And we know, Dave Canales coming in may change some things. So Sanders is somebody worth taking a look at. And then your guy for the Giants, Theo Johnson, if he can stay healthy. No Darren Waller. Daniel Bellinger obviously is feels like the de facto starter, but Johnson at some point may have a role that is worth taking a look at. And then one more guy, Josh Wiley in Tennessee, got a lot of good reports pushing Chigo Okonkwo. So just somebody that you can keep an eye on and maybe talking about as a waiver wire addition later in the year.
Yeah. In Tennessee, you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Jared Wiley for the Chiefs. I wonder for the Chiefs, what if Kelsey got hurt? What would happen there? But
yes,
it's never been. Kelsey really hasn't gotten hurt that much. But anyway, all right. Well, you know what? I'm not even going to speak that into existence or even mention that. So thank you to Jamey Eisenberg. Thank you all for watching and listening. This is Fantasy Football Today Express. We'll talk to you tomorrow.